Pra Oslo, pra sair no Oslodum, bloco asfro da terra do bacalhau.
Oi, tudo bem? I'm Professor Jason. Welcome back to my Jumpstart Brazilian Portuguese course. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about using common contractions in speech and writing. We've got plenty to cover, so let's get started. Vamos começar! Alright, just to give you an idea about what to expect in this lesson, here's an overview of the topics I'll be presenting. We're going to start off by talking about what combinations and contractions are and how they're formed in Brazilian Portuguese. From there, we're going to go through some contractions and combinations sorted out by preposition. So we'll look at contractions using the preposition a, move on to com, then de, em, para, and por. Pretty straightforward. Alright then, in Brazilian Portuguese, a number of common prepositions can be combined with other parts of speech to form a series of combinations and contractions. Now, since it's not super important to stress the difference between combinations and contractions, from here on out I'll refer to all such forms simply as contractions. So contractions are formed by combining the prepositions you see on this slide with various other parts of speech, including certain articles, personal pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, definite pronouns, and adverbs. And you can see some examples of the ones that form combinations and contractions here on the slide. All right, before we move on to look at contractions in greater detail, I want to cover a few caveats or things to keep in mind. First, only certain combinations of the elements on this slide are possible, and of these, only certain contractions are actually common in speech and writing. Secondly, it's important to note that certain combinations occur more commonly or might be considered more permissible depending on whether we're talking about speech or writing. And degree of formality can have an effect too. But frankly, those are details that are beyond the scope of an intro-level lesson. So I'll be focusing on the forms that are most common in speech and fairly informal everyday kinds of writing. Finally, I won't be giving examples of even all of the commonly used forms either. There's just way too many to give examples. But I'll try to give enough examples to provide a good sampling of common usage and equip you to recognize and be able to use all of the common forms. All right, let's get to it. Okay, so here's the first grouping, and I've decided to present the prepositions in alphabetical order. So we're starting off with the preposition a, which forms combinations and contractions with the other words or forms you see on this slide. Now, I'm not going to go through and pronounce each of these because as we move through the lesson, it would just be way too many. So you can see them here on the slide, and just wanted to point out that the last three forms, the last three bullet points, are examples of the form known in Portuguese as crase, which occurs when the preposition a contracts with the feminine articles a and as, or another word that begins with the sound a. And it's going to be marked in writing with the grave accent mark, that inverted accent mark. So on this slide, what we have are some examples that use the combinations or contractions formed from the preposition a. Let's take a look. Ela entregou o trabalho ao professor. To the, ao professor. Aonde vocês vão depois da aula? To where. Aonde vocês vão? Where are you going to? Aonde vocês vão depois da aula? Vamos ao mercado. Vamos ao mercado. So that is to the, that contraction. Ao mercado. Or vamos à igreja. That's an example of crase because it's the combination or contraction of the a preposition and the a definite article. Vamos à igreja. Pedi à vizinha que cuidasse do meu gato. Again, we need the crase, right, marked with that grave accent because we're conflating or combining or contracting two as, the preposition a and the a that's the definite article, the. Pedi à vizinha que cuidasse do meu gato. O programa começa às 11 da manhã. Another case of crase. O programa começa às 11 da manhã. And then one with the form aquela. Me refiro àquela foto. I'm talking about that picture. Me refiro àquela foto. Okay, now moving on to the next preposition, com. The preposition com contracts with prepositional pronouns to form contractions that mean with me, comigo, with you, contigo, with us, conosco, and with himself, with herself, or with themselves, consigo. Okay? Now that form, consigo, is usually used in the third person, especially to indicate a reflexive type meaning. So with himself, with herself, with themselves. But consigo can also be used in written texts for second person forms other than to, such as com vocês, com os senhores, com as senhoras. You could also say consigo, but you'd see that more in writing. So on this slide, let's take a look at some examples of these contractions formed with the preposition com. We have, are you going to the movies with me? Você vai comigo ao cinema? Remember, ao is another contraction. Você vai comigo ao cinema? Meus pais vão jantar conosco. My parents are going to dine, have dinner with us, conosco. Posso me sentar contigo? Can I sit down with you? Posso me sentar contigo? Contigo. And then the president brought the flag, the country's flag, with him. So to take something with someone. O presidente trazia consigo a bandeira do país. O presidente trazia consigo a bandeira do país. He brought it with himself. All right, moving on to the next preposition in alphabetical order that forms contractions, we have the preposition de. So as you can see from this slide, de is the preposition that generates the most contractions. So I've put the most common, and there are actually more than these that are formed with de, but these are the most common, right? We have the definite articles, o, os, a, and as. We have the personal pronouns ele, as for example in dele, dela. Those are often possessive forms, his, hers, right? Theirs, deles, delas. We have forms like isto, isso, the demonstratives like este or esse that contract with de, and also forms like aquilo, aquele, and aqui, right? Aí and ali. So I don't want to go into detail with all of those forms. I just wanted to point out that de is the preposition that generates the most contractions. Very, very common. And here we see some examples, and I think I mentioned earlier in the lesson that I wouldn't be able to give examples of every single form. So you saw on the previous slide that de generates multiple, right? A couple dozen different contractions and combinations. Here we're just going to look at, maybe 8 or 9 examples of some of the most common. So let's start it off with amanhã é o primeiro dia do mês. Amanhã é o primeiro dia do mês. Of the month. Do mês, of the month. The first day of the, contracted to do mês. Queremos uma boa vista das montanhas, of the mountains, das montanhas. We want a good view of the mountains. Queremos uma boa vista das montanhas. Não conheço o pai delas, meaning the girls, as meninas, their father. Não conheço o pai delas. Or, meu amigo vai comprar desses carros, one of those cars. My friend's going to buy one of those cars. Desses carros. Mas eu prefiro comprar uma daquelas motos. I prefer to buy one of those. Uma daquelas motos. O irmão dela não entende nada daquilo. Her brother, o irmão dela, não entende nada daquilo. Daquilo means about that. So he doesn't understand anything about that. Não entende nada daquilo. Elas não são daqui. They are not from around here. Elas não são daqui. From here. Daqui. And then the last example is, stay where you are, I'm on my way. Estou indo, I'm on my way. Não saia daí. Não saia daí, estou indo. All right, moving on to the preposition em, right? So much like de, eng also generates a large number of commonly used contractions. And again, I'm not going to go through each of them, pronounce all of them, but I do want to just maybe pause this slide for you. You can hit the pause button and take a look at all of the contractions. These are just the most common ones that use the preposition eng. And let's look at some examples of those prepositions or those contractions formed using the preposition eng, right? First one uses the contracted form nu. Eu me perdi no bairro antigo da cidade. Eu me perdi no bairro antigo da cidade. In the old neighborhood, in the city's old neighborhood. I got lost in the city's old neighborhood. No bairro antigo. Adoro passar férias na praia. At the beach. Adoro passar férias na praia. Remember, prepositions in terms of their meanings can be a little bit tricky because we often think of em as meaning in or on, but it can also mean at, right? So, adoro passar férias na praia. So that's em plus a. Minha mãe pode passar horas nas lojas do centro. My mother can spend hours at the stores downtown. Minha mãe pode passar horas nas lojas do centro. Nas lojas do centro. Tem 3 lagoas neste parque. There are 3 little lagoons, right? At this or in this park. Probably in this park. Tem 3 lagoas neste parque. Eu não sei cozinhar, mas você é bom nisso. So if you say that somebody é bom nisso, it means they're good at that. Eu não sei cozinhar, mas você é bom nisso. É bom nisso. You're good at that. Não insista naquilo, em aquilo, naquilo. Não insista naquilo que te faz mal, right? Don't insist on doing that which, naquilo que te faz mal. Naquele dia, on that day, right? Naquele dia, eu estava ocupado. Naquele dia, on that day, I was busy. I didn't do very well on that test, or I did very poorly. Eu fui muito mal naquela prova. Naquela prova. So we're combining em and aquela prova. Naquela prova. All right, moving on, and we're almost done. We've just got a couple more prepositions to look at. So, the preposition para contracts with the definite articles, yielding these forms, the ones you see on the slide, which usually means something close to for thee or to thee. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some examples of those contractions that are formed from the preposition para plus definite article. First one is pro or pro. Vamos pro hotel então. Vamos pro hotel então. Let's go to the hotel then. Vamos pro hotel então. Or for them, for the directors in this case. Essa mensagem é pros diretores. Essa mensagem é pros diretores. Para pros diretores. Elas voltaram para casa. Elas voltaram para casa, para a casa. You could also use the crase form, a casa. Elas voltaram a casa with crase. But here we're using para. Voltaram para casa. E finalmente, last example, compraram flores pras namoradas. So they bought flowers for the girlfriends, for their girlfriends is the assumption. Pras namoradas. So para plus as namoradas. Compraram flores pras namoradas. All right, and here we are with our last set of contractions. The preposition por contracts with the definite articles, yielding the forms you see here on the slide, which usually means something close to by means of, by the, in the, or through the. We'll see this in the examples on the next slide. So we have pelu, pelus, pela, and pelas. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some examples of those contractions that are formed with the preposition por and the definite articles. First off, pelu. Foram parados pelo policial. Foram parados pelo policial. They were stopped by the officer, by the pelu. Next example, the meaning is slightly different. Gostamos de caminhar pelo parque. Here, pelo means in the, or through the, or around the park. Gostamos de caminhar pelo parque. Third example, os livros foram vendidos pelos autores, combining por and os, right? So by the authors. The books were sold by the authors. An example of passive voice. Os livros foram vendidos pelos autores, por and os. É mais rápido subir pela escada. It's faster to take the stairs. Por a escada, pela escada. É mais rápido subir pela escada. Meu filho cortou a grama pela manhã. So this is por plus a manhã. Same in Spanish, right? Por la mañana, pela manhã. And finally, eu fui bem recebido pelas pessoas dessa cidade. By the people. Por and as. Pelas pessoas dessa cidade. Eu fui bem recebido pelas pessoas dessa cidade. All right, that's it for today's lesson. Hope you found it to be informative and useful. If so, would you please like, comment, and share with others? Don't forget to add and follow me on social media for updates, and be sure to come back to the Professor Jason channel again soon. See you next time. Até breve. Ciao.
Eu vou pra Oslo, pra sair no Oslodum. Um bloco asfro da terra do